Hey again, everyone. It's Mike and David from JinbuPal back again for the 10th week of our 90-day case study. David has built the entire JinbuPal app, and he's working through in 90 days to see how far he can progress in his Mandarin using JinbuPal. So if you haven't seen any of the previous videos, feel free to click the link in the top corner or check the video description below, and you can find a link back to the first video in the series and watch the whole series through David's entire progression as he learns. So today we're going to check in and see how he's doing. So yeah, how's it going, David? What have you been up to this week?
Oh, it's going pretty well. This was an interesting week. This week I originally I had planned on diving into a lot of the words within JinbuPal and kind of tackling characters and tones by picking common words and kind of going backwards, I guess. But I ended up deciding to really focus on some of the like retention pieces of my practicing. So
Okay.
I can just show you my screen. So yeah, I basically realized, and I had this issue when I first kind of started off on the characters, where I kind of got a I was chugging through so many characters a day and like tackling the meaning and the opinion, that I got to a certain point where like I look back and it was like I recognize all of these characters, but like my recall isn't very good for a lot of them.
Yep.
And I felt like I was starting to hit that a lot with tone, especially because there would be certain times where like I would look at a character, I would see what the tone is. I feel much more comfortable like pronouncing it, and once I like pronounced it and was like, oh yeah, like I now know how this should sound, I would just check it off and keep moving. But like I wasn't really capturing this specific tone or like really remembering the specific tone. Like I kind of was checking it off just because like I feel confident in pronouncing this now. Does that make sense, sort of?
Right.
So I went through a bit of that, and I wanted to just go back and make sure that not only did I know the tones, but I also had the opinion and the meaning down for a lot of the characters. So I really just started kind of at the beginning, and I've been going through and making sure that not only I know the tone, but those other pieces. On top of that, I also have been going back and looking at a lot of the grammar points for certain characters. Um, so, for instance, let's go to like yo. So I, I knew that this meant to have, and I knew how to say it, um, but like I wanted to go back and make sure that I had a lot of the understanding for what is the usage for this, especially since I
Yep.
see a lot of these so often. So that's kind of like a brief overview of like kind of where I was at this week.
Okay.
Um, One thing that has been kind of cool is that when I first started looking at the grammar points, I didn't know a lot of the characters besides like maybe the one character that I was reading about, and
Yep.
so when I would read the examples, it was kind of just like, okay, I see the usage, but now as I go back to the grammar points, I know like what a lot of the other characters are, and so it's a lot uh easier to digest just because it's like, okay, like I know I kind of get what the sentence is saying, even without like having to know you know what point this is.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
good. Yeah, it's kind of like when I went to Hong Kong years ago. A little over 3 years ago now. I got a bunch of stuff that I had, just like tickets, bus tickets, tickets to go to, we went to a horse race, stuff like that, little brochures and things. And I saved all of that. And then like, I don't know, not too long ago, when I went to China recently, I cleared out the bag of all this stuff that I had. And I noticed all this stuff that was completely insignificant to me that now it's like, oh, wow, I know what everything on here is. Or maybe a picture that I took. And then I look at the picture again and see that like stuff that was just, oh, that's a cool symbol when I took the picture now has meaning for me. It's really cool when you see that sort of stuff just kind of unfold in front of you.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, I guess like, I don't know, every time I kind of go back and re-look through the grammar points, it's making more and more sense to me. Because when I first was introduced to the grammar, like I didn't know any of the characters, so it just kind of felt like very kind of just almost like ephemeral. Like it's like, okay,
yeah,
they have grammar, like so
mm-hmm.
what? And like now that I kind of that tied with like all of the reading that I've been doing, like I I'm starting to see some of these structures in the wild, and that's been really cool.
Yeah.
As I get more confident with more and more characters, and like the characters kind of reinforce themselves. So
yeah,
cool. Yeah. I did have one sentence that I wanted to go over with you, and I don't know if we may have had this conversation before, but it's kind of around just like I don't know, getting my brain around like word structure. So this was a sentence I pulled from a random article that I was reading, and this translated to
well, and remember, it's just that it's a clause, it's an introductory clause from a sentence that you pulled out, right?
Yeah, exactly. It translates to in certain corners of the internet.
Yep.
And like if I'm reading out, kind of just translating word by word, right? You kind of have like "zai," which means like an at. So this is like at. This word means internet.
Yep. That's actually one of my favorite words in Chinese because it's fun. It's just really fun to say. When you hear people say it, they say it really fast. They say "huliang," and that's one of my favorite things to say.
That's crazy. Yeah, I actually didn't know. I think I knew Wong from characters I had learned before, but I didn't know Hu or Lian. So I added those today when I came across this word, because I feel like the type of reading that I'm gonna enjoy doing is gonna talk about the internet a lot. So
yeah, you'll see that a lot for sure.
So you have like at internet. I guess this is like of.
Yep.
So I didn't know. I knew "xie," which means like a small number greater than one, right? So this makes this is some. So at internet of some, and then I guess this meant corner. At internet of some corner. So I guess I don't know. It's just like so different of wording than.
Yeah, and so one thing that I would say with this is I think this is a good sentence that you pointed out, because it kind of it highlights something about the way that things that are written in, well, I mean, just using native Chinese can sometimes differ from our expectations in English. And I would say that in this, even looking at this clause, when you showed this to me, my first thought was that if I were to just say this, try to say in some corners or in certain corners of the internet, in my head, if somebody asked me to say that, immediately my first thought would be to say 在互联网的网络, which is saying 在 and then moving the Moxia to the beginning, and then Huliang Wang. Yeah, so it would be taking that and moving that between Tsai and Huliang Wang. That's what I personally would do.
Yeah.
And if you plug that into a Google Translate, you will get the same translation in English. And I think that is an example of kind of, I watched a video once of an Australian diplomat who was speaking on a Chinese network news station. I think that was the case, and he was talking, really, really fluently. And I was reading in the Chinese comments, and it was either in the Chinese comments or it was his description of his own Chinese. He was saying, somebody was saying in the video or in the comments that the way that he phrases things in his sentences, although he speaks very clearly and speaks very quickly and concisely, and his pronunciation is correct, there's certain ways that he phrases sentences that are kind of a giveaway. Like if you were to just listen to the audio to say this person clearly isn't a native speaker. And I think that's kind of one of these things. So it's kind of like in linguistics, they call it, I believe this kind of applies to this situation. They call it something called code switching, which is when you take the rules that apply in your own language and you use those on another language when they're not exactly applicable. Mm-hmm. So basically, we're used to in English, we would say in some corners of the internet. And what this is saying in Mandarin is in the internet of some corners. And what I'm inclined to do is to say in some internet's corners. And so I think that, you would not be incorrect to say it the way that I did. But I have encountered lots of examples, particularly when I'm watching like a native, like a Chinese film. Particularly, I notice in films a lot. I think because of the way that the script is written versus like dialogue and conversation, you encounter more of these things that I'm like, I hear it and I'm like, wait, what did they say? And then I read the subtitles and I understand it. But especially hearing that, I mean, you were a little confused reading it in that order, especially if you hear it in that order when you're not expecting it. It can be really hard to get used to that. And mm-hmm. I personally have a problem with that, especially with films. And so I think it's something to get used to, but I would note that if you watch somebody who's a foreign speaker of Chinese, they will very rarely speak, especially someone who's an English speaker of some kind, or just natively speaks any sort of Romance language. It is unlikely that they will do what you're seeing in that sentence, because it's hard for us to predict the way to do that. And maybe that's just my assessment of it, but that's personally what I've experienced with it.
Yeah. Do you just, I mean, is it just repetition that gets you comfortable with the different type of word order? And is that repetition, have you found through your practicing, is it through reading or listening or just everything? Like,
I think it's reading is the best way to conceptualize it, and then actually doing it and speaking. Once you finally internalize it a little bit better, let me say it this way. Reading helps you to internalize it and you get more used to it. And you might not even understand it or really feel like you've internalized it or feel like it's natural, but then you know to do it. And so now you start having conversations with people and you do it yourself and it just feels right. Like it would feel wrong not to say things a certain way, which is really kind of, that's when you're starting to feel like you're actually speaking the language. Because if you were to do this direct translation like we just did of like at internet of some, it just feels awkward. And the reason it feels awkward is because you're speaking Chinese in English. And if you just like speak Chinese, you're like, oh, I get it. This is just how it's supposed to sound. Yeah. And it's, unfortunately, there's not that much of a better answer of it than I have, just that it just sounds right. And some of those things there's other things too that you encounter that are just rules that I think are pretty arbitrary. And English has a lot of our own rules that are arbitrary. And some of those I'd argue, you know, they probably sound really, really normal to a native Chinese speaker, but to me, it's still kind of like, it's not like it sounds awkward to say it the other way. So like, if you've noticed yet, you can say like iga or like zhega or naga, and the ge is the classifier for like accounting for the next noun that you're going to use. But some arbitrary things don't use ge; they use something else. So if you were to talk about a door, you would use men. So sorry, you would use shan, yi shan men, and or like a big building, you would say yi zuo, and then the building. And so those certain things, I don't feel, to me at this point, it wouldn't feel awkward to say yi gunmen rather than yi shanmen. But I don't know if you were a normal speaker, if you'd be like, oh yeah, that sounded really, really weird. So some of them, you just, over time, it just becomes really natural to say things that way. And I think a lot of it's just from the reading and internalizing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. There have been certain characters that oh man, I'm not gonna be able to find one on the spot. I guess like characters that like have very specific grammatical uses, and that's really the only thing that they're used for, that like I don't fully have a grasp on. Like,
Oh,
I think like this might be like a big one, but
yeah.
like this is used for like past tense, right? In some cases.
Yeah, so this is this is an interesting one. It can be used for, it can have a few different meanings. And so, I mean, we might as well go over it if we're talking about it. So it can be used, technically it's kind of frowned upon to say it's used for past tense. Really what people say is that it's the technical meaning of it is that this shows completion of an action. It depends on the context of what you're seeing. So there's three different things that you might see. And, if I'm missing something, put it in the link below or in the comments below. But one of those, which is definitely the most common, would be to note the completion of an action. So you would put it like kind of similar to what you said, showing past tense. You would have a verb, and with it being an action, after it you have la, which suggests that action has been completed. Mm-hmm. However, some giveaways that it might not be that. There's two other reasons, and both of those have pretty much the same giveaway, and that's that if it's not used in the first meaning, then it's probably used at the very end of the sentence. And you could say it can be used to emphasize something when you're saying something is like, you could say like, let me think of it. You could say like, 太好了, and that the tai is like too hao is good. So too good is like, damn, that's really good. And then the la is exaggerating it. Or you could say, yeah, I mean, so that's an example of that. Another thing that you can do is to indicate that something has changed. So you could say, to say it just started raining, you could say 下雨了. So 下雨 is rain, and then la means it wasn't raining and now it's raining. And it can be confusing because you might think, and I still sometimes mistake situations in which I would think that means it rained, not it wasn't raining and now it is raining. And so sometimes it can result in a lot of confusion on whether you're saying something is just now occurring or whether it already has occurred. Now there's one other meaning too. If you go back to how you shared your screen there, you see that it is there's two different potential pinyin for it. And so one is le and the other one is liao.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other way that it's used, I would say most commonly it's used as le in the first definition that I described, to make something a completed action. The second most common is probably when it's used in the word liaojie, which means to understand. And in that situation, you only know that it's meaning that because you see, yep, it's the second one on the screen right there. Right there, yep. That word, you just have to know when you see jie behind liao, that's what it is. And you just get used to recognizing that and seeing that. You'll also see that in front of the la is something that's not applicable. It's not a verb. It's not a, you could say like 我了解. It wouldn't make sense to put la after 我because it's not a verb. So that's how you know it belongs to this word. But this is pretty much the only word that you'll see it appear in.
Dang. And how did you learn all of that? Was that through?
So a lot of that was from reading grammar articles and stuff. And mainly the main way I learned it is just through noticing sentences that I would read and seeing it in a context that I didn't understand. So as I mentioned, those first two reasons are very, very common. And then when you see them at the end of a sentence and it's separated from a verb and it's just after an adjective or whatever, you're just like, or it's just after a noun, you're just like, what is going on here? I don't understand this. And so that caused me to go look it up. And this is actually something that people kind of, this is a known thing that foreign speakers of Chinese have a lot of difficulty with this. So that, you can look on like Reddit and stuff, and there's probably all sorts of memes about it and everything because it's that big of a thing.
I guess I picked.
Yeah, so you picked a good example, and it's the point of the fact that you noticed that it was difficult and confusing is half of the point. You're seeing it again and again, so you realize that it's important, but you're also realizing that you don't always understand why the hell somebody's using it.
Yeah.
So now you start getting more and more exposed to it and more curious about it. I mean, being curious is an important part of it.
Yeah. I guess ma would be another one that you see I haven't checked the meaning off because like I know this is used at the end of sentences for like a question, right?
Well, so actually this is ma. So that's used in and I see it's got ma and ma at those two as well. To be honest with you, I'm not sure of these two definitions. I think we need to look into that. But that first one, this is almost is pretty much always used in question words. So in English we have like who, what, when, why, how, where, right? Mm-hmm. So in Mandarin you have what is 什么 and when is 什么时候 and yeah, so and why is 为什么.
I'm thinking of the other one.
But you're thinking of ma, which is that first one, number one. Yep, that's what you're thinking of.
Okay.
And that's got a pretty clear usage. It will always end up at the end of a sentence and have a question mark after it.
All right.
But yeah, I will definitely agree with you that those other two, the ma and the ma definition of the ma there, I'm also perplexed by that. So we should look into that in the database.
Okay, cool. But yeah, I mean, that was all I had today. I guess like I've gotten down my routine, my practice routine, and I'm feeling a lot more comfortable with things. And I just want to make sure that the stuff that I have checked off, like I actually know really well, which is why this past week, I've kind of been just kind of redredging like a lot of stuff that I already have in here because I see a lot of these characters over and over again. It's like, let me make sure I have this stuff down packed. And now that I feel more comfortable reading some of the like basic sentences, like the grammar points hit a lot easier. So I want to continue to reinforce a lot of those so that,
Yeah.
I feel really confident when I see stuff in the wild that I at least have marked that I know, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Cool, man. Well, you're making awesome progress, and the fact that you're pointing out these things that you're curious about is, I mean, that's good, and that's how you learn it. Is by there's a lot of grammar stuff to learn, and the sooner you can get through that, then it's just from that point forward, it's just hammer away and get a ton of vocabulary.
Yeah.
And yeah, so cool.
Sweet.
Well, yeah, so for everybody watching, make sure you check back next week we may not be able to get a video next week, but the following week, we'll see how that works out. I'm going to be on vacation, but yeah, check back with the rest of the series. Again, if you haven't seen the beginning of the series, click the link or the video description below and head back and see the whole series. And make sure to click the like button and subscribe so that you can see more videos like this. And make sure to check out our website at JinbuPal.com, where we have tons of blog posts and other content to supplement everything on this channel. And that's also where you'll be able to sign up for access to JinbuPal once it's open to the public. So check it out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. See you later, David.
Yeah.